The year was 1999. India was fighting a major war in Kargil, and it wasn't an easy battle. See, the Pakistani soldiers were present in higher positions on the hills, and Indian soldiers had to climb up to fight and remove them. It took us almost 3 months and the lives of 527 brave soldiers to win this war. But after the victory, the Indian government was faced with a shocking truth. India was dependent on other countries to fight its war. And this is something that General VP Malik, who was the army chief during the Kargil war, spoke about in detail in an interview recently. In his words, "We faced severe shortages, and Western countries led by the US proved to be a major choke point. We could not import what we needed, and even supplies from Russia and South Africa were either outdated or inadequate. In 1999, we faced a spare parts crunch, which rendered some of our Bofors guns unusable. Imagine this, you're fighting a war, and your key weapons are coming from other countries, and some of them who are not even your allies. I mean, you can't function like this if you're an aspiring superpower. In a hyper-evolving world like today, there are no permanent friends, and hence you have to be self-dependent, especially when it comes to defense equipments." And this thinking was largely ignored for years. It was only in the last 10 years that India took some serious steps to become a self-reliant country in the defense sector. Our defense production has increased by 174% in the last 10 years. And as a result, India has moved from 65% import dependent to 65% self-reliant in this sector. Also, we now export weapons to over 100 countries, and our defense exports have increased 34 times in the last decade. So in this video, let's understand how this happened, how India, which was one of the biggest importers of weapons in the world, is now becoming a major exporter. Also, what's the role of startups and private sector in making this happen? And before we start, I want to mention that we are now part of Zerodha's 01 network. And now let's get started. At the time of independence, India was largely dependent on the UK for its defense requirements. We had these ordnance factories which were established by the British, and they used to make basic stuff like rifles, ammunition, uniforms, and some spare parts. All the heavy weaponry used to come ready-made from the UK and its allied countries like France. It was only during the 1962 war that India realized the importance of making its own weapons. In this war, India had outdated weapons like this Lee Enfield .303 rifle, which was of the Second World War era. Against this, China had semi-automatic and fully automatic machine guns. Also, many of the weapons used by the Indian army did not perform well in the high altitude and freezing areas where the war was fought. As a result, after the war, the Indian government set up a Department of Defense Production under the Ministry of Defense. The specific objective of this DDP was to develop a self-reliant and self-sufficient defense production base. Also, the government increased the budget of PSUs like HAL and BEL and asked them to make more indigenous weapons. But this did not happen as expected, and there were several reasons behind this. Firstly, the role of the private sector was very little in all this, and most of the government funding used to go to defense PSUs. And because of the lack of the private sector, there was no competition, and hence very little innovation. Next, the 60s and 70s were the time of the license Raj, and there were complex bureaucratic hurdles in getting anything done. And as a result, there was very little coordination between the army, the government, and these defense PSUs. And finally, the R&D budget of the government at the time was so less that it was not enough to develop a local defense industry. Also, there were two major wars during this time, the 1965 and the 1971 war. So the government never got a chance to focus on becoming self-reliant. And as a result of all these reasons, our dependence on imported weapons kept increasing. Between 1960 and 1989, it grew 10 times. The next big step in this direction was taken in 1992. See, India's biggest ally at the time was the Soviet Union, and in 1991 it had collapsed, so India needed a new strategy for its defense procurement. And so India's then Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao set up a self-reliance committee under APJ Abdul Kalam. See, at the time, India was importing 70% of its defense requirements from outside, and only 30% were made in India. And one of the main targets that this self-reliant committee had set was to increase local defense production from 30% to 70% in 1 decade. But even though we set an ambitious target, there was no considerable policy change or efforts from the government to make this happen. And as a result, India's defense imports kept on increasing, and this peaked in 2013. Also, by 2010, India had become the largest importer of defense equipments in the world, spending billions of dollars every year. This meant that a huge chunk of our defense budget was flowing outwards, and India's local weapon industry was struggling. Something had to change, and it did in 2014. In 2014, India saw a new government with a new vision and big goals. And one of the first schemes that this government launched was Make in India. The idea was to encourage companies to develop, manufacture, and assemble products in India. And this was soon followed by Atmanirbhar Bharat, where the idea was to make India self-reliant. And together this marked a fundamental shift in India's defense manufacturing. The first thing the government did was to completely change the old defense procurement procedure, or DPP. It introduced a new category called Buy Indian, indigenously designed, developed, and manufactured. And the idea was that if an Indian company could make it, then that's who the military would buy it from. And then came the Positive Indigenisation List, and this was a game changer. The government started listing hundreds of products that would be banned for import after a certain deadline. And the idea was clear: India has to make these products itself. And this list included all sorts of defense products, from simple components to complex systems like artillery guns and light combat helicopters. In total, the government has listed 5,500 products in this list, and over 3,000 of them are already made in India today. And finally, to make these things possible, the government liberalized the FDI rules in this sector. It increased the FDI limit from 49% to 74% for companies seeking new defense industrial licenses. And this limit could be up to 100% if a company is bringing in advanced technology. The idea was to bring not only the money, but also advanced technologies and global expertise in India. And as a result of these policy changes, India's defense production increased rapidly. In 2015, India's annual defense production was 46,429 crore rupees. And this has increased to 1.46 lakh crore rupees in FY25, a growth of 217% in one decade. And thanks to this, India has now started making advanced weapon systems. For example, the light combat aircraft Tejas, the mighty battle tank Arjun, surface-to-air missile system Akash, the multi-barrel rocket launcher Pinaka, and most importantly, India's first indigenous aircraft carrier INS Vikrant. And because of this, the share of local defense production has increased dramatically. From being dependent 65% on imports, India has become 65% self-reliant in just one decade. And the dream of APJ Abdul Kalam is finally becoming a reality. Also, India is now not only making these weapons for itself, we are also exporting it to over 100 countries, including advanced economies like the US and France. Our defense exports have grown from 636 crore rupees in 2014 to 23,622 crore rupees in 2024, 34 times growth in just one decade. And now the goal is to reach 50,000 crore rupees by 2029. Now, of course, all of this change has not happened just because of defense PSUs. In fact, 60% of defense exports are done by the private sector. It's because of the active role played by the private sector and the startups that India has seen so many innovations in defense systems. Whether it's unmanned aerial vehicles like drones or building military transport vehicles and many more autonomous and artillery defense systems. The Make in India scheme by the government has opened up the defense sector for private players, something which was not the case earlier. And I want to mention one key policy that has really helped the startups and private players. It's called Innovations for Defense Excellence, or IDEX. And this is a game changer. Let me tell you how. So today, let's say our armed forces or defense PSUs face a problem and they need some sort of innovative solution. In this case, all they have to do is reach out to IDEX. And IDEX then takes these challenges and presents them to the startups. And if a startup wants to work on it, IDEX gives them a grant, sort of like a seed money to begin with. This grant starts from 1.5 crore rupees and then goes up to 10 crores and even 25 crores for important technologies. Already more than 500 problem statements have been launched by IDEX, and over 600 startups and SMEs are working on them. And we already have many success stories. There is Chennai-based Big Bang Boom Solutions, which has developed anti-drone systems and advanced body armor. This company got a 1.5 crore rupees grant from IDEX in 2019. And today it is getting hundreds of crores of rupees worth of orders from the Army and the Air Force. Then there is Bengaluru-based QNU Labs, which is working on a quantum communication technologies. They got IDX grant in 2019 and have since raised more than $20 million and have already signed a deal with the Indian Army to develop a quantum-safe solutions. And there are so many startups like this. I can do a separate video just talking about 5 to 10 defense startups. Let me know in the comments if I should do that. But for this video, that's all I have. I hope you liked this journey of India mostly being dependent on foreign weapons to almost becoming self-reliant. The next step for us is to double down on the exports. Recently, India made it to the top 25 countries in terms of defense exports. But if you compare it with top 3 countries, India is way behind. So the next goal for our defense startup should be to look at the export market and build for the world. In the end, let me know what you think of this journey and what has been your biggest takeaway. Write it in the comments and I'll see you in the next one.